It was done by Life Dynamics. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Mark Crutch in Denton, Texas, and they have researched and done a tremendous historical piece on slavery and Margaret Sanger. But again, because people don't know their history. But if you can kind of give people these kind of things, they've got to be educated. You know, we've in the last 20 years, in the last 10 years especially, there's a black preacher by the name of Wayne Perryman, and you can Google his book too. It's called Undeserved Loyalty. And Wayne Perryman was he's a black preacher in Washington State, and Democrat all his life. And he was working in the ghettos or the rough areas of Seattle, and a number of the kids were saved from the street, and ultimately they said, well, Pastor, we won't be responsible. How should we vote? He said, well, vote Democrat. But see, these were street kids. They had never voted. So they said to him, why? He said, okay, I'll go back and research, and I'll be back next week, and I'll tell you. And he started researching his history. Matter of fact, he sued the Democratic Party a few years ago. And he's written 3 books. Michael Medved, some of you might be familiar. Sometimes he sits in for Mike because because he learned his history. And there's a number of books that there's a guy named Ben Kenchlow who used to be on 700 Club for years. As he said, he used to be one of the militant black guys down with the, you know. And one day he discovered his history, and he's written a book entitled Black Yellow Dog, and he has things like this in there. The first person to take the United States government to court to perpetuate slavery is a guy by the name of Anthony Johnson. You know who Anthony was? He was a black slave owner. but he and his family gotten a lot of property through the indentured slaves where you willingly, and he had this vast, but it's those kind of things that the history will change their mind. And there's a number of books. I've got a list of 25 recommended books. My website is joshuastrail.org, joshuastrail.org. If you go to my website, I have something on my website also called 25 Historical Facts, because I sat down once and just consider these 25 facts about race relationship in America, because it's so distorted. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Why do you think that 2/3 of the black community have aborted their children? What do you think is behind it?
I'm going to let this be the last question. Now, I understand that, but we got to remember something. He called this a tape. That means he's probably older than 35.
Yeah.
And I know he's a powerful speaker, but I don't want to tax his voice any more than necessary.
Why 2/3 of our black babies are aborted is simply back to the 60s sexual revolution, for lack of a better word. You know, in my community, when I was coming up, it was a disgrace to get pregnant before you got married. And like I said, the black community I was raised up in, I'm 71 years old, and it's not the same community that I came up in. See, I came up where I had a dad that worked 2 jobs to take care. It was a disgrace to be on welfare. My uncles worked, my granddad worked, my dad worked 2 jobs. But then came the 60s, and the attack, not just in my community, but America, on values. And the community that could least throw away moral restraint was our community. Now, here we are in the midst of self-extermination. And it's because the sexual values, or the values that we were raised with, here again is the great contradiction. One of the great churches, or one of the large churches in our community, black community, is a Pentecostal church. And literally they would have purity classes every Sunday. You had to go to purity classes to learn how to maintain yourself. Wait till you get married. And here's that political thing again. But now that organization is almost totally sold out to the Democratic Party. So they perpetuate, it's just like the NAACP, who cries racism on every other breath, but yet they support black genocide, 2/3 of the baby, because leading organizations like the NAACP promote Planned Parenthood. and feel like this is a solution to your problem. And it speaks to the moral collapse that Star Parker, somebody heard of Star Parker. Star Parker was written a book called White Ghetto, and she's saying the same thing that hit our community is hitting America, and it's spreading because we distorted history, and that's happening in my community more than that. And then Brother Johnson, the Great Society. You know, I lived in Chicago, and most of my life I was raised a young life from 9 until a young adult, and I was there during the Southern migration from the South. And many of those folks who were coming from the South, they had created these great big high-rises. And when those folks were pouring on, my brothers and sisters were pouring off them buses. See, my family was a working family. My uncle went there in the 40s. He worked 35 or 40 years for Dutch Board Paint. He bought his home. But when they put in welfare and they start supplying homes and apartments, but you couldn't have a man. You couldn't have a husband in the house. So, you know, you could have 5 babies, you know, by osmosis, and still get more money. And that undermined the marriage structure. She could tell him, get out. You know, you don't tell me what to do. And so the belief in family and the man being there, all that just got torn down. Then this hate seed, hey, the very thing that Martin Luther King taught to love, I have a dream speech. Hey, they just trashed that. Here comes the Rat Browns and the Scotia Carmichaels and the Black Panthers. And as I always say, the boomerang of hate came into our community, and it's done us more harm than the folks that they call themselves hate. And that all deteriorates morality, and that's what's happened. So now you're so perverted in your minds, tell you you're literally cooperating with your own genocide, think you've got all this sexual liberation, when in essence you're destroying your own neighborhood. And last but not least, it's because of the churches that have married themselves to political entity that helps undermine the values and morality of their own community.
Thank you very, very much. I want to repeat that number. How many people knew 8,000 a week? How many people knew that? Not too darn many. And I just learned it from listening to a promo on radio he did with Red Kingman yesterday.